Earlier I mentioned fat tom, and that is what microorganisms like bacteria need to live. And fat tom is an acronym that stands for food, acidity, time, temperature, oxygen, and moisture. So if we take a look at F, that stands for food. These microorganisms need something to eat, and hopefully it's not what you're serving to your customer. When we look at acidity, a low pH like 4.6 to 7.5 reduces bacterial growth. They do not like that type of environment. If we take a look at the first T for time, food should not be left in the TDZ. If you all remember, the TDZ stands for the temperature danger zone. And that zone is the range of temperatures that you do not keep food in. Means it must be above or below that range. Food cannot be within that range for 4 hours or more. If it ever hits the right temperatures, meaning it's in between, the wrong temperatures depending on how you look at it, but the temperatures that are within the TDZ zone, for 4 hours, that food must be immediately discarded. What we want to do is prevent it from getting there by taking corrective action, which also comes on an active managerial plan or in a HACCP plan. Continuing on with the TOM portion of our fat TOM, the second T is going to stand for temperature, and we want to keep food out of the TDZ zone. So we've already mentioned that the time that it's in there. We also want to make sure we monitor the temperature at which we hold, keep, prepare, and store that food. The O stands for oxygen. And oxygen is very relative here. Some bacteria will only live if it has air. So aerobic means has air or oxygen. Some bacteria will not live with air, so they need the absence of air or anaerobic, not air. Unfortunately, that only covers about 4 or 5 of the 40 different types of foodborne illnesses that we can have. The rest of them are adaptive, and that's called facultative, which means they can live if you give them oxygen, and they can live if you don't give it to them. So really, the first 2 are not even important in the sense that we just need to keep food safe and minimize the opportunities for bacteria to grow and thrive. Lastly, bacteria need moisture. And moisture comes in different varieties, but the only moisture that is going to allow a bacteria to grow and live and thrive is water. Foods with a water activity, or AW, of 0.85 or higher are where you're going to find bacteria foodborne illnesses. For instance, a bread dough, you might find the bacteria, you bake it, you kill them if they were there and they didn't create toxins. A baked piece of bread does not have enough water activity to allow the bacteria to grow, because they don't need just one of these 6 items, they need the right environment for all of them. Also mentioned earlier is TCS and PHF, time and temperature controlled for safety, and potentially hazardous foods. Examples of these are foods from animals, foods from plants that have been heat treated, raw seeds, cut melons, garlic and oil mixtures, things that are non-acidic or more basic. Foods containing any of these items are considered a TCS or PHF food. So when we talk about acid or the alkali balance, bacteria are affected by the pH of their environment. They can survive in a wide range of pH levels, however they prefer that 6.6 to 7.5 range. And if you remember the pH scale, it's 1 to 14, 7 being neutral, and that is water. So they like it a little less water and just a little bit more acid. And you can create an environment for them that they can grow and thrive. But remember, you can go a little bit lower to 4.6 with the basic side, like oils. A bacterial growth curve is shown in the diagram here that has the lag, log, stationary, and decline phases. So the lag phase is where the bacteria are kind of existing or are present, but the right environment has not been created for them to start growing, splitting, and multiplying. The log phase is where they start growing rapidly because those items that they need have been created or existing for them. The stationary phase is typically about that 10 to 12 hour mark, where the ones that existed originally have now started to die off, so there's a kind of a plateau. And then the decline stage is where the majority of those at the 10 to 12 hour mark are now 10 to 12 hours old, and they die in large masses. By that point, the person ingesting the product has probably become ill and needs to seek attention. Temperature is the most important factor in pathogenic bacteria's environments because it's easiest controlled, and the food service worker can do that very easily by monitoring the temperature, and that is keeping hot foods hot and cold foods cold. You'll hear that when you're in the kitchens. We talk about hot food being served on hot plates, cold food being on cold plates. It's just a similar idea and concept. Nothing should just be left at room temperature. Even produce is not supposed to be kept in 90-degree weather once it's been picked. You want to keep it cool, and certain items you want to keep them cold, which again reduces the risk. Some people ask why produce doesn't have to worry about some bacteria, and that's because produce grows outside. It grows the sun, the dirt, and all these different things, so it has ways to protect itself from the bacteria getting inside unless it's been compromised. For instance, several years ago now, the food code was updated to include a TCS food as a 7-day shelf life for like cut watermelons or cut tomatoes. And that's because the bacteria that were on the outside now have the potential to be on the inside, and you don't know that because you can't necessarily see it. The FDA and such can do tests, but that's very costly and time consuming. But you as a small restaurant or business owner may not have the time to, or even the money to even try to think about that. So that's why one of the things we do is we always buy from reputable suppliers, those that we know are getting good food, they're following inspection and guidelines, monitoring their time and temperatures, and all the things that we need to do. That way we know that the food we buy is as safe as it can be. So this slide has a lot of information on it, even though it's just one slide. First, remember, keep hot foods hot, cold foods cold. By doing that, you almost eliminate the food ever sitting in the temperature danger zone. So the temperature danger zone, also referred to as the TDZ, is 41 to 135. And what that means is anywhere between 41 to 135, you do not want food sitting in that temperature range for very long. You want to get it up and through and out above 135, or down and through below 41 to keep it as safe as possible. What I want you to also recognize is that that's where the bacteria will multiply. More importantly, the high risk zone is there's a second range within that first one, and that is between 70 and 125. Between 70 degrees and 125 degrees, bacteria will grow the most rapid. If you look at 70 to 125 and ask yourself, what's about the midpoint? 98, 98.6. What is 98.6? Human body temperature, you're right. So we are the perfect host at an ideal temperature with food, water, an acidic balance, moisture, and all it needs then is time and temperature, which 98 we've already given, so it just takes time, and we can cause a lot of problems by ingesting these bacteria. So you have the TDZ of 41 to 135, and the high risk zone is in that, which is 70 to 125. And if you look at the thermometer on the right side of the screen, you'll see that I've marked those in red. Speaking of temperature, how do we gauge temperatures? How do we monitor that? And that's going to be through actually taking the temperature, not assuming, not doing a touch test and so forth. As a young, inexperienced student or food service worker, you definitely need to minimize risks and not take chances, and I would encourage even a chef not to do so. If you have a log that shows that you take your temperatures and all that, like the food code or the health code says or states, then you're going to help protect yourself and minimize risk. So one of the types of thermometers is a bi-stem metallic thermometer, like in the picture on the slide. The red arrow, just for reference, is pointing to what would be called the dimple. When you have a bi-stem metallic thermometer, the dimple needs to be inserted into the food. So if it's 2 inches up on the stem, you need to insert that thermometer at least up to the dimple. If not, it's inaccurately reading and you can serve food that is not properly cooked or at the right temperature for safety. You'll also notice with bi-stem metallic thermometers, they top out at 220 degrees typically. Water boils at 212, steams 213. You don't need to go any higher. So this thermometer you would never use to check a fryer oil, because oils are always going to be over water temperature and it would ruin it instantly. Bi-stem metallic thermometers are nice though, because you can calibrate them by using the ice point method or the boiling method. You also have instant read models that are digital. Those can be inserted, or they have infrared, which you direct at the food and it reads the internal temperature. That's really helpful when you have like a gallon of milk and you want to see what the temperature is in the very center. Why, do you ask? It's one thing we haven't discussed, but when you have something that's in large quantities, which is why we always try to break it down into smaller quantities so it cools and we control the temperature better and faster. But in a larger product especially, the outside and top and bottom are what cool first, and then it moves in a little bit, moves in, moves in, moves in, moves in, until you get to the very center. Well, that means the very center is the last thing to cool down, which could be still in the temperature danger zone 3, 4, 5, 10 hours later, depending on how big of the amount of food that was there. That's why when we cool things, we stir it, we break it down to smaller items so that it cools much faster. So the reading of an internal center temperature is important. So when we look at oxygen, we already mentioned this. Aerobic, the bacteria thrive with oxygen or need oxygen to live. Anaerobic, not air, they cannot survive with oxygen, so they must have an environment that is absent or free of oxygen. And of course, most bacteria, as mentioned, are facultative, and they can either adapt or they just can live with air or without air or oxygen. When we look at the moisture component of fat, Tom, we mentioned bacteria need moisture to live. Bacteria don't necessarily die if there is not enough moisture, but it slows the growth, minimizes the growth until the environment is hospitable. When dehydrated foods are rehydrated, bacteria present can flourish and the food may become potentially hazardous. This is particularly important if we think about what spores are, which is the first time I've mentioned this. But spores, think of a bacteria that has a built-in shield. So when the environment is not optimum for their growth, they can put this shield on and kind of lie down dormant until the environment is right, and then they can peel back their shield and then start doing their business by eating, feeding, and having time and temperature and growing into a problem. So we finished discussing bacteria. Now we're going to talk about parasites, which are also a living organism, but they live off of a living host. For instance, trichinosis, which is often found in pig or pork. And it also is found in game animals, like if you were to have wild boar, bear, and even some venison or deer, elk, moose, and so forth. Trichinosis, though, unlike salmonella, can be killed by cooking the food to 137 degrees for 10 seconds. So it makes you wonder why you had the overcooked, rubbery pork chops of yesteryear. Well, that's because people didn't know any better. The risk was much higher because it was much more common. And safer is always better in people's opinions. But as a cook, you cannot sell a rubber pork chop for an amount of money that makes money or makes a profit or keeps your doors open. Customers will not come back for it, especially in today's world where they're more educated. They see things on TV, they cook a little bit at home or try new things, or they go to other restaurants that execute it better. But the bottom line is to know what keeps that food safe. The second question I would pose to you is, why was trichinosis so prevalent? Well, back in the 60s, 70s, where this was happening, and probably even before the 60s, the pigs were fed slop, leftover food, or what we now call compost that we put into mulch in gardens and things that were not meat. You could sit there and go rancid, but the pigs would eat it because their digestive tract could handle it, but the parasites, like these little worms of trichinosis, would bore into their skin, bore into their muscle, and live there until it's harvested, and then if it's not cooked properly to kill the worm, then your body ingests it, and then the problems begin in your body. Today it's a little bit better because we do a lot more grain feeding, which is a little more natural. It doesn't have a chance to go rancid, hopefully not cross-contaminated either. Last I read, it hasn't been since 1973 that there's been a case of trichinosis based on American raised pork. So keep that in mind. That's why today you see pork being served medium rare. The biggest thing that you should remember anytime you serve a meat that is not at the optimum temperature is, one, did you do it safely? The food you bought, was it safe? Meaning, do you know that it was a reputable supplier, that the best chance for that food to still be safe was given to you or not? But also you need to consider what type of meat that you're using. And I'm not talking chicken, beef, or pork. I'm talking specifically to, is it a ground meat product? Is it a whole muscle? And the reason is, a whole muscle is one muscle. You can't, besides food glue, which you should not do, it's disgusting. But you cannot just glue meats together. You would know if it's a whole muscle. You'd look at the muscle strands and all these things in the anatomy of the animal. Well, when it's one muscle, the risk is much less. A lot of bacteria live on the outside of the muscle and within the fat. Well, when you take it and grind it up, like a burger or ground pork, you've now mixed that bacteria all throughout. So you have to be much more safe. Moving on to viruses, they are the smallest form of life, and they are prevented through prevention of contamination. For example, hepatitis A. You can get it from shellfish that live in polluted waters. One of the scariest ones for me is poor personal hygiene, people that don't wash their hands before and or after they go to the restroom. Cross-contamination, which we've mentioned a couple times today. And it takes over a cell and can cause it to reproduce more of it. The common flu, or if it is common any longer, is a virus. And that's why people get sick so easily, because it's airborne and it moves from host to host. The one thing that's interesting, and it doesn't help the situation, but a virus must have a living host. So if the host has it and they pass on, that virus will die off if it had not been transferred to another person or living host before that happened. If you look at the norovirus, or also called the Norwalk virus, it's passed by poor personal hygiene and those infected by their feces. So if a toilet is contaminated and it's not properly cleaned and sanitized, it could be passed that way. If you look at the cruise ships, I guess it's been about 2 years ago now, where it was very prevalent in the news that 3 or 4 different ships had a norovirus outbreak, and it was detrimental to the cruise line for a period of time, and it still might even be affecting them. But more importantly, how many people got sick? Everybody's stuck on a boat. Why did so many people get sick? Because it's airborne. And until you start showing symptoms, you don't necessarily know to kind of remove yourself so you can't or don't contaminate somebody. Moving on into fungi. Most common problems are poisonous mushrooms, and that's caused by people foraging. If you were to ever forage, ensure you are 100% certain of what you're looking for, what you're picking, and what you may even decide to ingest. And I highly recommend you do not do that in your business until you've had it verified that you have found the right thing you're looking for. It is the right version, variation, strand of the plant, whatever it is that you know is safe. You can definitely get death from this. You want to buy them from reputable suppliers. And most of these items include molds and yeasts. Again, there are 3,000 mushroom varieties, but only 10% of them are edible, which comes out to about 300 of them. Molds, algae is a fungi for instance, are large colonies and they are visible to the naked eye. Most molds are not dangerous, or we're going back to that putrefactant to the pathogenic type, the ones that cause foodborne illness. Some molds are beneficial. If you think about blue cheese or even penicillin, and I'm sure you've heard the joke when you're a kid, oh, if you have penicillin, you're eating mold, and people get grossed out. But the idea is that some things are beneficial. With molds, they can cause what's called mycotoxins, and of course you've learned already what a toxin is or can be, and that is that they cannot be destroyed by heat. So if it is a toxin or it is contaminated with them, you're just heating it up. You do not destroy it. You do not do anything but make it warm. The person, if they ingest it, will still get sick, and toxins are a high concern in our industry that you want to protect. Foods that develop molds should be discarded, again, because you don't know what that is. One of the exceptions, and we could go on and on about this, but one of them is cheese. If a cheese molds, and it's not supposed to be a ripened cheese that has mold like a brie, you can still save that cheese. What you are to do is to cut 1 inch away from where the mold ends, discard the part with the mold, and then the other part of the cheese is good. I will tell you though, cheese that has begun to mold must be used in a day or two because it will continue to spread to the rest of the product. And we cannot afford to throw food away, but we can also not afford serving food that can make people sick. The idea of saving the cheese that's not molded is because mold spreads. It doesn't just fly through the air to everywhere. If you watch it on a piece of cheese or of product, it starts in one spot and it migrates across the rest of it, given enough time and the right temperatures, especially moisture content. But if you cut 1 inch away from it, the idea is that you did not take that and cut through that mold and push it into the cheese as you cut through it. And you can just cut off the rind, the outside, and so forth, and then use the rest of that product as mentioned.